Today is August 5th, and this is William Michael of the Classical Liberal Arts Academy. One common question that I get from homeschool parents is, how much time will we need to devote to study the curriculum in the Classical Liberal Arts Academy? How much time will it take to complete the studies every day? And this question is what's called a complex question, because in the question there's an assumption, and the question is really not sincere. The answer is already assumed when the question's asked. It's not an honest question. When someone asks a question, how much time will it take to study the Classical Liberal Arts Academy curriculum? They're already assuming that the standards are those of modern schools. The fact that they're even asking about how much time proves that they're thinking and talking about modern education, because modern education is based on time. It's not based on subjects. It's not based on actual mastery. It's based on legal requirements that determine how much time is necessary for students to satisfy the minimum requirements. Now, what's really insane about parents talking about the minimum requirements is that these are not minimum requirements for wisdom. These are not minimum requirements for success as adults. These are not minimum requirements for the successful entrance into professional careers or admission to selective universities. When we talk about the minimum requirements of modern schools, we're talking about the minimum legal requirements. And what that means is, these are the minimum requirements, and if you go beneath these requirements, you're actually breaking the law. You're actually not giving your children the minimum education that's considered legal. Now, if we were to compare this to any other area of life, we'd see how insane it is. Let's imagine that we were going to talk about nutrition. And imagine if there was a law that said, this is the minimum legal requirement for the nutrition of children. So if you are a parent and if you have children, this is the minimum that you need to feed them to not break the law. And imagine if the parents said, oh, what are the minimums? Oh, they need to have 1 cup of milk, 2 eggs, and 2 slices of bread a day. That's the minimum legal requirement. And then imagine if the parents pulled out their notebooks, jotted that down, and went to the grocery store and bought that as their grocery list. They went out and bought enough milk to give the kids 1 cup a day, enough eggs to give the kids 2 eggs a day, and enough bread so that the kids could have 2 slices of bread a day. And imagine them telling themselves that they're providing for the nutrition of their children. That's not what the legal requirements are for. It's not a recommended diet. It's the minimum legal requirements. And yet when it comes to education, this is what parents are doing. They're allowing the minimum legal requirements to actually establish the curriculum for their children. And when you think about it, it's really insane, but that's what's become normal. Now, one reason why it's not that big of a deal is because throughout history, most people didn't even go to school. So the fact that parents do anything is probably worth considering as an upgrade from what might have been done in the past. But when you consider all of the opportunities and resources that we have available today, and think that there are parents who are pursuing the minimum legal requirements for their children, you can see what a great waste of opportunity it is. And I really didn't understand this when I was younger, but as I've worked in education, as I've worked in Christian education for almost 25 years now, I've learned that Christians are actually just as bad when it comes to the neglect and despising of education as non-Christians are. What the public schools are offering students is the minimum legal requirement. If we look over to the local Catholic school, we'll often find that they're offering the same program of studies as the public school. If we look to homeschools, we'll often find that they're offering even less than the public schools. And you might wonder, if they're offering less, wouldn't that be illegal? And in many cases, I would argue that what homeschool families are doing is illegal. They just don't get checked upon by the state, or they find a way to cover it up. But the problem is, no matter what we say, no matter what excuse we give, we've got ourselves hovering around the line of minimum legal education requirements in modern public schools, in modern private schools, and even in homeschools. And so when someone asks the question, how much time is needed to study the classical liberal arts curriculum, I know what they're asking me. They're actually comparing our curriculum, our program, to other options, and they're going to compare based on how much time is required, as if there's any such measure possible. Just think about what an irrational question that is. How much time is required? Now, when someone asks me that question, the first thing I ask is, how in the world am I supposed to tell you how much time your child would need to study our curriculum? Are you suggesting in this question that all children have exactly the same ability and can study at the same pace? Obviously, no one believes that. We all know that some students are intellectually gifted. Some students have great support systems in their families for education. Some students are extremely slow, and it doesn't even matter if they've got great support systems. There's a wide range of ability from one student to the next, and there's no way to tell anyone how much time will be required for the completion of any study program. Built into that question is an expectation that the kids will just get grades and that no one even cares if they master the studies. So what they're really asking is there a fixed schedule, a fixed daily schedule of required time commitment to this curriculum, so that they can use that as a measure to compare with other programs? And when I get that question from parents, What I want to tell those parents is you need to go away. Because in the Classical Liberal Arts Academy, that's not how things work. You need to go find some modern, bare minimum school program or homeschool curriculum because you have no idea what the Classical Liberal Arts Academy is about. And I normally make that very clear to the parents who ask me that question. What a crazy question to ask about classical Catholic studies. It makes no sense. It's like going to Mass and asking how long is this going to take, as if you have other obligations that are so important that we'd like to make this as short as possible, or maybe we can abridge the liturgy and make this really, really quick so you can get out of here and get back to whatever else you're doing. Maybe we should ask, how much time do I need to pray each week? How much time should I spend at Eucharistic adoration? The only thing you can possibly be asking in those questions is, what is the least possible amount of time that I need to do this for? And the true answer to that question is, you don't need to do this at all. You can go away. You don't need to do this at all. You're not doing anyone any favors. These activities are not dependent on your participation. If you don't want to be here, and if you don't want to do this, go do something else. But don't put pressure on the priest or on the teacher or on the school to hurry up. Because those of us who serve ends that are not minimum requirements, that's not how we think about the things we do. That's not how our programs and activities work. We have real objectives that need to be fulfilled, and it may take one person an hour to fulfill the objective, and it may take another person 3 hours to fulfill that objective. There's no way for us to tell that. So it's just the wrong question, and it's got an assumption built into it, namely that we're aiming at minimum requirements, and we're looking at the Classical Liberal Arts Academy as an option for the pursuit of minimum legal school requirements, and that's not what the Classical Liberal Arts Academy is for. So if that's the kind of question, or if that's the kind of measure that you're going to use to evaluate different study options available to you, you need to move on, because the Classical Liberal Arts Academy is not one of your options. Now, as we look at modern society, we look around as Christians and we see Christians complaining all over the place. They complain that there's not enough priests. They complain that convents are closing because there are no nuns. There are no monks or brothers. Many of the monasteries are empty, or if you look at a picture of a religious order, it looks like a retirement village rather than a monastery. If we look at the church, we find that the schools are staffed by people who are more or less public school teachers. Many of them aren't even Catholics. We find that the music is poor. And if we're honest, it's like, what's the bare minimum requirement that's needed for music at worship? And that's what we've got. There's little to no teaching, little to no evangelization, little to no culture. And it's because this minimum requirement mentality is present throughout the church. And you can't You can't blame other people. You can't criticize other people because you very well may be guilty of this yourself. And as a Catholic culture, as a Catholic generation, and unfortunately for my generation, we're already getting older, we have to make a commitment to stop living according to minimum requirements. We have to make a commitment to live not according to the fulfillment of minimum requirements. We've got to learn to live like the saints did. Think about St. Ignatius of Loyola, whose feast day was just this past week. You know, St. Ignatius's motto was Ad Maiorem Dei Gloriam. That was the motto for his life. To do all things for the greater glory of God. To do all things to glorify God. That was the principle of his life. So if we're going to look at education, we should not be asking questions like, how much time is this going to take me? What are the minimum requirements? What do I need to do to get this certificate or check the boxes to get a diploma? That's not how Christians should even think. We should be asking, what do I need to do to glorify God? What do I need to do to serve God? What do I need to do to make myself useful to God? What do I need to do to help the church? What do I need to do to help my family? What do I need to do to help my community? How can I help and serve my country and do all these things for God's glory? That's what it means to live for the greater glory of God. It's not a minimum requirement lifestyle. And so the questions that Christians should be asking about education are not the questions that modern schools and modern school parents are asking. They're not the questions that modern college students are asking. What do I need to do to get my degree? How many credits do I need? What's the easiest possible set of courses I can take to get this degree? And so on. That's not a Christian mindset. The book of Ecclesiastes teaches us a principle. Whatever your hand finds to do, do it with all your might. Obviously, we're not living like that when we're talking about minimum requirements, asking how much time is this going to require? That's just the wrong question. We need to ask, what will education look like if we study for the glory of God? That's the question. It's worth noting, I learned this one year when I spent a couple of weeks at Clear Creek Abbey, which is a Benedictine monastery in Oklahoma. Beautiful, traditional Benedictine monastery. I was there for a couple of weeks because the abbot and one of the priests had invited me out there to talk about classical education, just privately among us. And the priest who I was speaking with gave me a copy of a book which was a commentary on the rule of St. Benedict. He gave it to me so I could read it while I was visiting. I have something good to read. And I did. I spent my 2 weeks there around the times when we were scheduled to get together to talk and discuss education. I spent my time flipping through this commentary on the rule of St. Benedict. And one of the things that was interesting that I never knew about the Benedictines is that when we consider St. Benedict's motto, Ora et Labora, we think of prayer and work, or pray and work. We always think of the monks doing physical labor. And at Clear Creek Abbey, they do all that sort of stuff. They make their own food. They have sheep out in the pastures. They've got dairy cows. They're doing all kinds of different mechanical works, gardening. They're living Saint Benedict's motto of ora et labora. However, as I was reading this commentary, I learned that labora wasn't limited to manual labor. It wasn't limited to humble, earthly, physical work. It also included intellectual work. Study is also included in the concept of labora. And so for someone who's got an academic vocation, we could translate pray and work to pray and study. But this is what's important, and this is what's explained in the commentary on the rule. Study is only considered true study when it's pursued with the same tenacity as manual labor. So if you were to look out into the garden and see the gardener out there working, and you found him doing the bare minimum work that was required for him not to get fired from his job, no one would say that that worker, that gardener, is working for the glory of God. We would say that worker is working just for the sake of a paycheck, not even for the good of his employer. He's doing the bare minimum that he needs to do in order to get his money, because that's all that he cares about. He doesn't care about the good of the garden. He doesn't care about the plants. He doesn't care whether he brings from that garden the maximum fruit that's possible. He's just worried about getting his paycheck. And if the master is away, he might not do any work at all. And that's the character of a man who doesn't fear God, who doesn't live to the glory of God. Because when a man lives to the glory of God, he doesn't need anyone to supervise his work. He doesn't need someone to wake him up in the morning. He doesn't need someone to tell him to pray. He doesn't need someone to tell him to get to work or to study. A man who fears God, who knows that God is always present, that God is always watching, that man will direct his own affairs, seeking to please God. And that's why in the Proverbs, Solomon says, go to the ant. Go look at the ant. And when we go and look at an ant, if you go outside even today and go find an ant on the property somewhere, you'll see that ant is working. That ant is busy. That ant's moving. He's doing stuff. He's carrying a crumb of bread, or he's pulling a leaf and moving a leaf someplace. The ant is busy working, always working, and yet there's no one watching that ant. There's no one telling that ant what to do. That ant is working because it's his nature to do his work. And God says to us in the wisdom books, he says, go and study the ant and learn to be diligent. Learn not to be a sluggard. Learn from the ant what it means to work without any supervision, without anyone telling you what to do, because it's good to do that work. That's how we're supposed to work. And so, as I was saying, I learned that study is to be pursued by Catholics with the same intensity that we would pursue physical work. And again, I'm assuming that we're talking about a diligent, industrious, productive, profitable worker. I'm not talking about some lazy person doing the bare minimum. But we respect hard physical work. And when we do hard physical work, and maybe the fact that we don't do hard physical work is part of the problem with modern education, when we do hard physical work, we normally get rewarded. And the harder we work, the greater we're rewarded. And so when we push ourselves as hard as possible to work, we get to enjoy the fruits of our labor. And this is actually how we become wealthy in an honest and virtuous way. We become wealthy by being prudent and by being industrious, by working hard. And the harder we work, the more prosperous we become. Jesus in the Gospels teaches that the man who sows abundantly will also reap abundantly. To sow means to plant crops. He says the man who plants crops abundantly will also be the man who reaps a harvest abundantly. We get out of something what we put into it. That's how life works. And so if you were to ask how much time should I spend working, there's only one possible answer. And the answer is, what would you like to harvest? What would you like to harvest? If you would like to harvest a lot, then you need to work intelligently and diligently. And if you don't want to make a lot, well, yeah, then you don't have to work very hard. But normally this isn't what happens. Normally, people want to receive a lot, but they don't want to work a lot. And that's what it means to be covetous. To be covetous is to desire an abundance that you're not willing to work for. And usually people who are covetous end up stealing, because stealing is really the lazy man's way of getting the things that he covets or desires unrighteously. If we think about the famous men in the Bible, men like Abraham, Moses, Solomon, and so on, we find that many of them were very wealthy men. And they were wealthy because they were wise and industrious. They weren't silly men. We see them working. When we read about their lives, we see them managing their herds, managing their lands, managing their kingdoms. We see them taking responsibility for their work. And do you think that they lived every day asking, how much do I have to work today? How many hours do I have to work today? No, because what ultimately matters is, what are you hoping to achieve today? What are you hoping to reap? And the answer that these holy men gave was, I want to glorify God with my life. I want to fulfill all of my potential, all the potential that God has given to me. I want to fulfill that potential. I want God to be pleased with my work. I want Him to look at my life and be satisfied with me. I want to make God happy. I want to glorify God with my life. If we ask that question, then we can actually start to make progress, because the pursuit of real wisdom is no joke. It's no minimum requirement curriculum. It's very difficult. It takes many years. And the only way to get it is to toil for it. And when you ask, well, how many hours should I study? The only answer is, as many hours as you have. That's how much you should study. And it doesn't matter how many hours you give, you'll need more. Because wisdom is like the ocean. It just gets deeper and deeper, and there's no way to fathom its depth. But because this is our nature, we're rational creatures, we were created to think and reason and learn. That's what we are. That's our peculiarity. That's our unique attribute as human beings, is that we learn, we study, we know, we understand, we reason. That's what humans are. You'll see men showing off their muscles, but strong is not what men are. You'll see men winning Olympic races and showing off their speed, but men, in comparison with other animals, are not fast. You see all of these Olympic events, jumping, running, and so on, but these things don't glorify man. There are animals that we can find that will beat us in all of these different activities. Oxen and horses are much stronger than we are. Cheetahs and leopards are much faster than we are. Monkeys can jump much higher than we can. Lions and bears can wrestle and fight much better than we can. These are not the things that glorify God. There's one power that men have that none of these other animals have, and it's the power of the intellect. And really, there's no activity that man can perform that brings greater glory to God than to fulfill the potential of the human soul. That's really what it means to live to the glory of God. To fulfill the potential of human nature. That should be our goal. This is why the ancient philosophers, the first rule of ancient philosophy was, know thyself. Know thyself. Plato teaches this in his dialogue, First Alcibiades, which I recommend you reading. If you're going to read Plato, First Alcibiades should be the first dialogue that you read. And in our courses in the academy, it is the first dialogue that we give to students to read, although very few students read it. But the question is, what is man? And the Catechism teaches us man is a creature composed of body and soul, made to the image and likeness of God. That's what man is. So to glorify God means to fulfill the potential of our nature as human beings, as creatures not merely composed of bodies like plants and animals, but composed also with an intelligent, rational soul that will live forever, by the way. And we do this primarily through learning, by studying, by contemplation, by the pursuit of wisdom. This is where we fulfill our potential as human beings, and we should seek to do so to glorify God, to become the creatures that He designed us to be, to fulfill His purpose in creating us as such. That should be our goal. And you can see that when we ask the question, well, how much time do I need to study? What a dumb question that is. This is what you're made for. This is what we do. And you can also see that built into that question, how long do we have to study? How much time is necessary for these studies, for this curriculum? Not only does it show that the person has no idea what they're talking about, because this is no mere homeschool curriculum. This is the pursuit of true wisdom in the Classical Liberal Arts Academy. But there's nothing else for man to do. There's nothing greater for man to do than this. And so the question that we should be asking is not how much time do I have to spend studying as if there's something else to do. We should be asking, how much time can I make available for myself to study? How much time can I make available for myself to study? That's a very different question, and that's the right question. That's the question we should be asking. How much time can I make available for myself to study and to fulfill my end as a creature composed of body and soul, a rational animal made to know, love, and serve God in this world? That's the question we should be asking. So no parent should be contacting me and asking, how much time do we need to study? A parent should be looking at their own life, looking around their own house, looking at their own schedule, and asking themselves, how much time can we study? That's what they should be asking. What can we do? What can we eliminate that would allow us to study more? It's a very different question. But that's the question that should be asked is, what can I do to study more? Because what I should be doing is studying as much as possible. I should be seeking wisdom as the principal thing in life. Proverbs says, better than any gold or silver or any riches, nothing that you can have compares with wisdom. So just see how unwise it is to ask, how much time do I need to spend on this curriculum? Just the completely wrong question. We should be asking, how can I find more time? How can I devote all of my time to the pursuit of wisdom? And this is a question that should especially be asked by young children. Students who are school-aged, they should be asking this most of all. What can I do in my life that would allow me to pursue wisdom as much as possible with the fewest possible distractions? What kind of life can I live? What kind of schedule can I follow that will allow me to study as much as possible and fulfill my potential as a creature composed of body and soul, made to the image and likeness of God Himself? And this is why young men and young women throughout history chose to enter into religious vocations. It's very unpopular today because no one seeks wisdom. There's no explanation for why they don't seek wisdom. They're not seeking anything better than wisdom. It's because in modern society, young men and women have no taste for wisdom. They don't want to glorify God. They don't want to devote their life to seeking wisdom. They're devoting themselves to seeking inferior things instead. But young people should be asking, how can I pursue wisdom to the greatest degree possible? That's the question we should be asking. And God has provided for that life in religious vocations. God has actually instituted and calls men not to build bridges or skyscrapers or invent new computers or devices or make cars faster or make materials for buildings stronger. He calls men to devote themselves entirely to the pursuit of wisdom. And hardly anyone responds to that call. And we can look around and see the consequences of that. Just think to yourself, if you have a question that you need an answer to, or you have a decision to make, who can you call upon for wise advice? What wise counselor can you call on the phone or schedule to meet with or send an email to or text a message to? Who are your counselors in your life? Who are the wise men that you seek advice from or seek out to help answer questions? I'm sure that you'll see that there are very few men available who we can call upon. And we can't complain or blame anyone because we're not seeking to become those men either. We're just as guilty as they are. And this is one of the important things that people don't think about when they think about studying. In modern schools, people study for their own benefit. They study because they think that if they study, they'll get a degree, and that degree will help them to get a job, and then that job will get them money. And then that money can be used to procure for themselves all kinds of comforts and pleasures. And so ultimately, even if they're studying, the end of their study is just worldly pleasure. Well, that's not what study is for. And you can see that if a person is not motivated to have a lot of worldly possessions, the person won't even have motivation to study. He won't even care if he has a degree. Won't care if he completes a course. Because he'll just say, I don't really want anything, so I don't even need to study. But that's, again, a wrong way of thinking. What we should be asking is, how can I fulfill my potential? How can I do all that God made me capable of doing for God's sake and for the sake of others? And we should realize that when we study, when we seek and gain wisdom, we not only gain that wisdom for ourselves, but we gain that wisdom for the benefit of people around us, people whose lives we influence. If you're a child, and all of us obviously are children, wouldn't you want your father to be wiser? Wouldn't you want your mother to be wiser? Well, that's all the persuasion that you should need to seek to be wiser yourself. Wouldn't you want your friends to be wiser? Wouldn't you want your boss at work or the mayor of your city or the president of the United States? Wouldn't you want the people who influence your life to all be wiser? That's why you should seek wisdom, to make yourself wiser. Not just for your own benefit, but also for the benefit of others. And today, in our generation, people are not seeking to be wise. How much time will it take? It will take every single hour of your life, and that will not be enough. It will take every bit of energy that you have in you every day from the time you wake up until you go to sleep, and that will not be enough. Wisdom demands all of your effort, all of your attention. If you're going to sacrifice for something, shouldn't you sacrifice for wisdom? I grew up playing sports. I played baseball, I played basketball, I played football, and I sacrificed for sports. I was willing to tear muscles. I was willing to break bones. I spent half of my childhood injured, limping around, nursing different injuries because of sports, and I considered it worth it. It was worth it. If I got injured, all I could think about was how I'm going to get myself better for the next game, or how I can find a way to play even if I'm injured, because I considered the injuries to be worth it for the sake of my sports. And yet, when we think about life in general, real life, not artificial sports, but real life, how many of us are willing to walk around injured for the sake of real life? How many of us are willing to work and sacrifice as hard for real life benefits as we are for things like sports contests and games? This is what needs to change in Christian culture. We need to change the culture so that we're not simply willing to injure ourselves in order to make our bodies look more muscular. We're not willing to injure ourselves to win a trophy of some kind or to beat a competitor at a sport. But we're willing to work and push ourselves and sacrifice and grind to the point where we're able to suffer for the sake of something that's real. Suffer for something that's good, suffer for something that actually benefits ourselves and those around us, and most importantly, that glorifies God. Why are we not willing to suffer for the glory of God? And when we talk about suffering, we often think about stories of martyrs, of saints being beaten and put to death for the faith, and that really doesn't happen very often. But the everyday work of the Christian life gives us opportunities to take upon ourselves voluntary sufferings for the good of others and for the glory of God. Just think about it. If you've sat up at night to study and you get tired and you realize that this is when most people will say, okay, that's enough, I'm tired, and they'll close up and go to bed. They'll preserve themselves and allow their own physical comfort to limit the time and energy that they'll invest in studies. But if you read the lives of the saints, you'll learn that the saints didn't do that. The saints pressed on. The saints pressed on in their work, they pressed on in their studies, they pressed on in their devotions and prayers, in their meditations and readings, in their writing, in their studying. They pressed on beyond those limits of comfort and convenience. This is the kind of thing that our culture, our generation doesn't like to do. Our culture is willing to do some religious activity as long as it could be fit into some spare time that we have available. Our culture is willing to work as long as it can be fit into the 9 to 5 work hours. Our culture is willing to study as long as it's a limited amount of time, and we still have plenty of time for all of the leisure activities that we want to pursue. That's what people are actually thinking about when they ask, how much time is this going to take us? They're committed to other things, committed not to world-changing works, not to urgent, important activities. They're committed to leisure. They're committed to idleness. They're committed to inferior activities that serve inferior ends. And they find study to be a disturbance. And so they ask, how much time is this going to take us? And the answer to that question is, this should not take you any time, because you don't desire what you should desire. And that's usually how I answer that question when I'm asked. I say, this is not the study program appropriate for you. Because if there's a student who wants to seek wisdom through the study of the classical liberal arts and scholastic philosophy and Catholic theology and the humanities, there is so much to study, and lessons are so difficult that if he or she doesn't devote himself entirely to it, he's just not going to make much progress, and there's not going to be much fruit. You've got to work to the end. You've got to persevere in difficult labors in order to get to a point where you begin to reap the fruits and enjoy the benefits. And there's just no easy way to get there. No minimum requirement. It takes everything. You've got to prove that you are wise yourself and desire what is most valuable. Jesus, our Lord, teaches us a parable where he says there was a man who learned that there was a pearl or a great treasure in a field. And so what did he do? He sold everything that he had and bought the field. That's what the pursuit of wisdom looks like. It's the pearl of great price. And what's the cost? Everything you've got. And a wise man will eagerly make that trade. Eagerly, quickly, exchange everything he's got for that field. And that's a decision that we have to make. If we desire worthless things, if we desire inferior things, if we're more concerned with playing a video game than studying philosophy, we're not going to do it. If we would rather play sports and master the art of throwing a curveball, we're not going to master the art of reasoning. You'll see. I can throw a really great curveball because I practiced it for years and years and years. And you know what? At 48 years old, it's completely useless. I wish I had spent the time studying the art of reasoning rather than the art of throwing and hitting baseballs. But fortunately, in my life, when I was 18 years old, I made the decision to devote myself to the pursuit of wisdom, and I devoted myself to it completely. There was nothing else that I wanted in life. And in fact, when I was 18 years old, I laid down on my floor in my bedroom one night and I prayed that God would give me one thing in my life. I prayed that God would give me wisdom. It was the only thing I wanted. And that was my prayer when I was 18 years old. And I think it's pretty safe for me to say that I've devoted my entire life to the pursuit of wisdom, and all the other cares of life. How am I going to make a living? How am I going to find a wife? How am I going to do this or that? How am I going to this or that? All of those things in my life have taken care of themselves. If we have wisdom, even a little bit of wisdom, and we can only get a little bit at a time, even if we get a little bit of wisdom, we have everything. And that's how God intends for us to live, to seek wisdom. So rather than ask, how much time is this going to take? Let's ask the right question and ask, how can I give all of my time, all of my energy to the pursuit of wisdom? I hope that's helpful. God bless.